Hi, welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we go back to 1964 one more time for a look at the Beach Boys concert album and the Dance, Dance, Dance single. And before we get started, I wanted to thank Jake, Matt, and Riley at the Good Time and Podcast here on YouTube for having me on their channel recently. I was a guest on episode 15 where we looked at Beach Boys record releases from 1966 through 1969 and tried to put together the ultimate 24-track compilation from that time period. It was a lot of fun, and those guys know the Beach Boys like the palm of their hand, to quote Don't Back Down. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. Thanks again for having me on. Check out their YouTube channel. It's the Good Time and Podcast. I think you'll really enjoy it. Hope we can do it again sometime, and keep up the good work over there, guys. Moving on to Beach Boys concert, it was drawn from 3 shows at the Sacramento Memorial Auditorium for promoter Fred Vale. The first of these shows took place on December 21st, 1963, which happened to be Carl's 17th birthday. And if you remember, a little over a year ago, our old friend Wes Roberts was kind enough to send me this very crisp version of the album, along with, very cool, an actual original ticket from that show. It was Fred Vale who persuaded Murray and Brian to have Capitol record the shows for a live album. Brian was dissatisfied with the results, and Capitol agreed to record 2 shows that took place on August 1st, 1964, when the group returned to Sacramento. I suspect by the summer of 1964, it wouldn't have been too hard to convince Capitol that a live album would be a good idea, with the holiday season looming and a ridiculously heavy touring schedule, keeping the band on the road and out of the studio for much of the second half of the year. Like most live albums, it was reworked. Just how extensively it was reworked seems to remain a matter of debate. At the very least, the vocals and probably the instruments for Fun, Fun, Fun and I Get Around were redone at a session on August 31st, 1964. I suspect there's quite a bit more to it than that. I haven't really tried to pick apart what's live and what's studio. Anyway, it would have been pretty standard to fix, re-record, or even use original studio recordings, especially in those days. Sometimes it would have been necessary to fix technical problems. It wasn't considered particularly underhanded or deceptive, it was just ensuring quality product. I'd have also thought they'd have probably needed to tweak the crowd noise at the very least to match 1963 to 1964. My guess would be that in August 1964, the screaming was a lot more intense than it had been in December 1963. Songs recorded at the August 64 shows that didn't make the album included Little Honda, Hushabye, Surfer Girl, Be True to Your School, Surfin' USA, Don't Back Down, Don't Worry Baby, and Wendy. From the 1963 concerts, Brian brought in Little Deuce Coupe, Long Tall Texan, In My Room, and Johnny Be Good, along with the album's introduction. Looking at the songs selected from what was available, I get the idea that the general rule was to choose cover songs that the Beach Boys hadn't released before, bolstered by a smattering of hits. And I'm sure it made the album more attractive to a lot of fans that over half, 7 of the album's 13 tracks, were songs that the Beach Boys had not recorded before. The song sequence doesn't follow the actual set lists, but approximates a concert set list, opening and closing with a big hit, and using Johnny Be Good as a kind of encore, with a couple of slow ones at points in the middle to vary the pace. The album begins with an introduction by Fred Vale. According to Fred Vale, quoted in the Beach Boys in Concert book, KXOA DJ Bob Early was supposed to do the introduction at the December 21st show and didn't show up. With the crowd getting restless, Vale ad-libbed an introduction himself, in which he said the group were going to entertain them with a gala Christmas concert. Understandably, the word Christmas has been edited out of the released version. After opening the album with their spring '64 hit single Fun, 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 we get the first of the cover songs. They don't get too far out of their wheelhouse on this one, Jan and Dean's Little Old Lady from Pasadena. Jan and Dean had released it as a single on June 8, 1964, and coincidentally, it peaked at number 3 on the charts the very day of the Sacramento concerts, August 1st. Obviously, the song would have been very current and known to the audience, and Mike seems to be doing his best to sing it like the original. Next, we get back to the group's hits with the first of the December '63 tracks. The concert version of Little Deuce Coupe begins with a clever and effective group introduction, with Mike highlighting what each member brings to the mix as they launch into the song. It's a great intro and something the group seemed to have used in concert for quite a long time. The next track, also from December 63, is the most obscure song in the set. Long Tall Texan first appeared in 1959 as an obscure B-side of an obscure single by the Four Flickers. The song was undergoing a relative renaissance late in 63 when the Beach Boys version was recorded. Murray Kellum, who specialized in country comedy tunes, released his version of the single on the MOC label in May 1963. Weirdly, the flip side was by a different country comedy specialist, Glenn Sutton. This is the closest to a hit version the song ever had. Kellum's version peaked at number 51 on December 21st, 1963, the very day the Beach Boys recorded their live version in Sacramento. The song was also released in December 1963 on The Kingsmen in Person, a live album recorded on November 15th and 16th, 1963, to create a quick album in support of their hit single, Louie Louie. As far as I can tell, Long Tall Texan was a pretty recent addition to their stage show. Whether they knew it from the newly released Kingsman version, the Murray Kellum version, or someplace else, I don't know. It's a goofy, fun song that seems to go down great on stage. Mike really throws himself into the performance and even gives us a couple of blasts on his saxophone toward the end. They've occasionally added Long Tall Texan back into the set list over the years, and I remember at the very first Beach Boys concert I ever attended in 1980, I was really stunned that they performed it. For a complete change of pace, we next get In My Room, returning to a Beach Boys hit. The recording is also from December 63 and seemingly gets a great reaction from the crowd when they recognize it. Next, from August 64, Brian introduces Mike as Boris Love to sing his favorite song with a couple of green lights on his face. Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett and the Crypt Kickers had been number 1 just over 2 years earlier for 2 weeks around Halloween, beginning October 20th, 1962. Lit with a green stage light, Mike affects a suitably monstrous voice, though he doesn't really come close to sounding anything like Boris Karloff the way Bobby Pickett did in the original. Like Long Tall Texan, the choice of Monster Mash seems to be all about making the show fun for kids, and it does sound like fun. Making it fun for the kids probably partially explains the inclusion of Let's Go Trippin', which closes out side 1. Mike asked the crowd to help them out by yelling out 3 words: "Let's go trippin'!" The song had been a single A-side for Dick Dale and the Deltones in September 1961. It's often regarded as the first surf rock instrumental and is credited with launching the surf music craze. It went to number 60 on the national charts on January 20th, 1962, but it was a much, much bigger local hit in Southern California, going all the way to number 4 on KFWB's chart. Of course, the Beach Boys had covered it on Surfin' USA. While you couldn't call it a Beach Boy hit, the live version is a blast and sounds riotously fun. It also gives Carl a nice spotlight number, and Mike honks along on his saxophone. Side 2 begins with another song new to a Beach Boys record and apparently chosen based on it being fun. Papa-Ooo-Mow-Mow had gone to number 48 for the Rivingtons on September 22nd, 1962. In his stage introduction, Mike describes the Rivingtons as a real friendly group of guys. Of course, the Beach Boys will revisit Papa-Ooo-Mow-Mow a year after the concert album for the Beach Boys Party LP. For the next number, Dennis comes out from behind the drum kit for a lead vocal, with Brian taking over for him on drums and Al switching to bass to cover for Brian. It certainly makes sense to have given Dennis, the group's sex symbol, a spotlight song, and The Wanderer was a good choice. The original version by Dion was released in November 1961 and had gone to number 2 on February 24th, 1962. It's certainly not the most distinguished vocal ever committed to record, but it's a lot of fun, and from the reaction of the fans on the album, a real crowd pleaser. The next track, Hawaii, is kind of a surprise for inclusion on the concert album. It's a great early track, but unlike most of the others here, it hadn't been a single. Rather, it was an album track from Surfer Girl. Maybe they wanted it to have a little additional deserved attention. Maybe they just liked the sound of the recording. It does sound great, and I could be wrong, but it also sounds like some of it, maybe a lot of it, could have come from the original studio recording. Mike introduces Graduation Day as another song about school. In the August 64 set list, it had followed Be True to Your School. He then continues his introduction by teasing the audience, seemingly throwing in a mild jab at Carl, who hadn't yet graduated from high school. The introduction then turns surprisingly earnest, with Mike telling the crowd, that it's by a group that influenced Brian Wilson and his writing. The Four Freshmen's version of Graduation Day went to number 20 in the overall Billboard chart and number 27 on the Billboard Hot 100 on July 7, 1956. There were actually several different Billboard pop charts in the late 50s, which we'll talk more about when we discuss 1957. Undoubtedly, it was the Four Freshmen version that Brian knew best, but there were actually two versions on the chart at the same time. The Rover Boys version actually did a little bit better on the Hot 100 chart, peaking at number 20 on June 23, 1956, 2 weeks ahead of the Four Freshmen. Graduation Day for me is a highlight of the set, though it's played largely tongue-in-cheek. Dennis's unexpected shout of the final "day" from his drums is effective and hilarious. Mike introduces I Get Around as a song that sold over 1 million copies and was number 1 in the nation. This certainly sounds the most like a flat-out studio recording of any of the tracks here. Apart from anything else, I'm not sure how they could have done those big hand claps and kept playing. As an encore, we go back to the December 63 show one more time for Johnny Be Good. The original Chuck Berry version went to number 8 on June 9, 1958, and was already considered one of the all-time rock and roll classics by 1963. Many sources say that Johnny Be Good was one of 3 songs played by the Beach Boys at their first official concert appearance at the Ritchie Valens Memorial Dance and Show on New Year's Eve 1961. They definitely did Surfin'. Memories vary as to what the other 2 songs were. Suffice to say, by the time they recorded it in December 63, the Beach Boys had a long history with the song. In 1990, the album was first released on a CD as a twofer with Live in London, which gave us Don't Worry Baby from the August 64 concerts as a bonus track. Considering the overall quality of that series of releases, they were a little stingy with the bonus tracks on this one, giving us only Don't Worry Baby and a 1967 version of Heroes and Villains from the Laid in Hawaii project, which doesn't even fit in with either album. The complete August 1st concerts were released in December 2014 on the digital copyright protection compilation Live in Sacramento 1964. Beach Boys concert was released on October 19, 1964. On December 5th, it became the Beach Boys' first number 1 album. It stayed at number 1 for 4 weeks. As popular as the Beach Boys were, I'm sure it was the lack of a new Beatles album that made room for Concert at the top of the chart. As discussed in the 1964 pop culture episodes, Capitol did manage to get Beatles 65 out on December 15th, while Concert was in its second week at number 1. By that time, I'm sure a lot of the holiday shopping was done and a lot of Beach Boys concert albums were already wrapped and under the tree. Weirdly, it won't be Beatles 65 that replaces Concert at the top of the charts, but the Elvis movie soundtrack Roustabout on January 2nd, 1965. Beatles 65 will hit number 1 1 week later. Of course, it can't be just holiday sales that made Beach Boys Concert popular. It'll have a long run on the charts. It'll still be at number 8 when Beach Boys Today is released in March. It'll stay in the top 10 until April 10th, 1965, and will spend a total of 62 weeks on the charts. For me, Beach Boys Concert always feels a little more like a souvenir than an album. According to Fred Vail, he presented the idea of a live album as a way for fans who had seen the concerts to relive the experience, and for those many Beach Boys fans who had never seen the Beach Boys live, an idea of what they'd missed and a reason to catch them next time. And I'm sure it was effective on both counts. I definitely appreciate the additional attempt to give added value by making this the first Beach Boys album with a gatefold sleeve and including a 4-page insert of photos and an essay. Personally, I'm never all that excited about live albums, and I'm sure Beach Boys Concert is my least played Beach Boys album of the 60s. It's always a fun listen when I put it on, and it captures a very important and specific time in the band's history. And one thing no one would have been aware of at the time was how quickly this particular part of Beach Boys history was going to pass. With Brian coming off the road in December 64, we can see in retrospect that this was already a historic document when it was sitting at number 1. On October 26th, 1 week after Concert hit the stores, there was a new Beach Boys single, Dance, Dance, Dance. The B-side was Warmth of the Sun from Shutdown Volume 2, and the sleeve featured more photos from their August concerts in Sacramento. Brian had first tried recording Dance, Dance, Dance while on the road with the group toward the end of their summer tour. On September 22nd, between gigs in Knoxville, Tennessee and Alexandria, Virginia, they took the unusual step of recording at Columbia Studios in Nashville. The Nashville version remained unreleased until it appeared as a bonus track on the Today, Summer Days, Summer Nights CD twofer in 1990. The sound is thinner and tinnier than the final version, and there are significant lyrical changes. The vocal arrangement is different, and the lead vocal from Mike sounds very live and kind of unfinished, like it was a guide vocal or something they meant to double track and never bothered to do. Brian was understandably dissatisfied with the recording, and they cut the released version at RCA Studios in Hollywood on October 9th, shortly after the tour ended. I've wondered whether that Nashville session was held because Brian was excited to record the tune, or if he was experimenting with combining touring and recording, possibly seeing if he could record during downtime on the road, maybe reducing the increasing pressure that he was under. If that's the case, it doesn't seem to have worked. The song is credited to Brian Wilson on the single and will be credited to Brian Wilson when it appears 5.5 months later on Beach Boys Today. The original sheet music credits Brian Wilson and Carl Wilson. Carl's contribution reportedly and unsurprisingly was the guitar riff and the solo, something that doesn't always result in a co-writing credit. Just ask George Harrison. The earliest place I found Carl co-credited on a release is the 1990 Today, Summer Days, Summer Nights CD release, and then consistently after that. It's really strange since he seems to have been credited on the sheet music from the beginning. Mike Love also received a writing credit for lyrics after the 1994 lawsuit. The opening verse, after 6 hours of school I've had enough for the day, recalls Chuck Berry's School Day, condensing the action in the first 3 verses of Berry's tune down to a single line. As so often with the best of Brian's work, there's a hint that not all is well. Here, it's so quick it's easy to miss. The line, "When I feel put down, I like to shake it off quick," rips by so fast and so assuredly, it's hard to catch the words, let alone the meaning. Overall, compared to their earlier hits, the lyrics seem less distinctive and a little non-committal. Singing about dancing seems like a safe bet. It's not about a teen fad or a specific dance that will go out of style, but it keeps it in the realm of teen subject matter. Even the Beatles occasionally sang about dancing. Musically, after clearly trying not to repeat the sound of their last single with When I Grow Up, Dance, Dance, Dance does have a decidedly similar sound to their big number one, I Get Around. Capitol even advertised in an October 1964 issue of Cashbox that Dance, Dance, Dance has the number one sound of I Get Around. Of course, sounding a little like I Get Around is not a bad thing. The song rips along with a great energy. There's some interesting percussion from Hal Blaine, including triangle, tambourine, castanets, and a wild sleigh bell. The guitar riff is distinctive and the break is hot. The vocals are great, particularly Brian's wild falsetto. This would have made a great car song if they were still writing them. That dance, 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 yeah section always reminds me of a car upshifting as it accelerates. It's possibly not as distinctive as the absolute top tier of Beach Boys singles, but it's a great one and always a delight to have on. Dance, Dance, Dance will begin a 2-week run at number 8 on the chart on December 19th. That puts it 1 spot higher than When I Grew Up to Be a Man's number 9 peak just 2 months earlier. In I Am Brian Wilson, Brian says that Dance, 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 along with the next single, Do You Wanna Dance, were successful, but weren't as successful as Capitol imagined. They imagined a situation where the tower of hits would just keep growing higher and higher. I can only begin to imagine the stress when you've hit number 1 and the reaction from the record company is, okay, now top it, which I've got to believe was not unusual. Whether the record failed or was a smashing success, you'd know that the pressure was only going to be greater next time, pushing anybody, even a Brian Wilson, to or beyond their limits. I hope you enjoyed this. I look forward to your comments. We've run a little long, so I'll just say thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, and have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye.